Sonny blinked. A notification appeared. You have received a memory, drop of ichor. Wait a moment, a great devil, he gulped. Nightmare creature with 4 soul cores was called a devil, just one class below the dreaded tyrant. From that detail alone, the evil ancient egg had been potentially more powerful than the carapace demon. However, what shocked him the most was its rank, not class. The quality of most things having to do with the nightmare spell followed a similar hierarchy, from dormant to awakened, ascended, transcendent, supreme, sacred, and divine. Humans had only ever managed to reach the transcendent rank. These heroes were known as saints, each wielding an unimaginable amount of power and leading humanity in its war against the nightmare creatures. The nightmare creatures, too, were different from each other in a similar fashion with 7 ranks of power. They were, in order of growing strength, dormant, awakened, fallen, corrupted, great, cursed, and unholy. A great devil, therefore, was a nightmare creature with 4 soul cores, each one of the great rank, which were the same in terms of power as a supreme soul core would have been if a human ever managed to pass the 4th nightmare and rise one step above the saints. Sonny had just killed one of the most powerful nightmare creatures to ever fall by a human hand, at least as far as he knew. Victories against the great devils were rare enough to be of historic importance. What a stroke of luck. To find one absolutely defenseless, yet to be fully born and weakened by thousands of years of neglect. Not to mention the fact that he was probably the only human alive to be partially immune to the egg's terrifying life-sucking powers. Wait, how many shadow fragments did I get? Sonny felt stronger, a lot stronger. He was used to receiving 2 fragments for each awakened beast he killed. Thus, it was fair to assume that a fallen beast would give him 4, a corrupted beast would give him 8, and a great beast would give him 16, forgetting the ridiculousness of the notion that a sleeper would ever be able to slay a great beast. However, the vile thieving bird's spawn was not a beast, it was a devil. It had 4 cores, so 64 fragments? Dumbstruck, Sonny summoned the runes. In his excited state, he even disregarded the insistent forgetfulness that prevented him from doing so earlier. His shadow fragments registered at 196 out of 1,000. After seeing the number, he was giddy with joy at first. But then Sonny frowned. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. I had 96 fragments before coming to the Ashen Barrow. I received 64 just now, that makes it 160. Where did the additional 36 fragments come from? From the fruits? No way, we've been eating them for less than a week, 1 fruit a day. To get that much, a whole month would have to pass. But how could so much time pass without him noticing? Yes, his memory was strange lately, but Sonny tried to concentrate on the discrepancy. But it was very hard, for some reason. The more he thought about it, the less clear he became on what exactly he was thinking about. What was I trying to remember? Something about the shadow fragments? Yeah. A few minutes later, he massaged his temples and sighed in frustration. I guess I was trying to calculate how many fragments I got from killing that vile egg. It's 64. What is there to think about? That is great. He would spend more time celebrating the insane amount of shadow fragments he had received. But there was another amazing thing waiting for his attention. A memory. He had actually received a memory from a great devil, a real, actual, supreme memory of the 4th tier. That was fantastic. Sonny summoned the runes once more and looked at his memories. His memories were Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, and Drop of Ichor. Hurriedly, he concentrated on the new one, the memory. Drop of Ichor, rank unknown, type unknown, description. The loathsome thieving bird was hated both by the gods and unknown. However, it only cared about shiny things. Enamored by Weaver's beautiful eyes, it stole one of them on a dark, starless night. Impatient, the vile creature looked at its bounty while still in flight. However, when it saw the reflection of unknown forever frozen in the depths of Weaver's pupil, it went mad and screamed, dropping the eye on the mortal realm below. All that was left in its greedy beak was 1 drop of pure golden ichor. Sonny frowned. What the hell was that? He had never heard of a memory with an unknown rank and type. How was this even possible? Did the spell really not know, or was it simply refusing to let him know? Why would it do that? And the description itself, what were these words that it failed to translate? He tried to forego the automatic translation and look at the runes themselves, but they were beyond his ability to translate. In fact, he had never seen runes of this type before. Weirdly, studying them caused him to feel dizzy and nauseated. That is very, very weird. Also, to his shame, Sonny had to admit that he had no idea what the word Ichor meant. It simply wasn't in his vocabulary. Maybe if he went to school and got an education like other sleepers, he would know. Sonny hesitated for a minute or two, then cautiously summoned the strange memory. Instantly, golden sparks of light appeared in the air in front of him, coalescing into a spherical drop of radiant golden liquid. What am I supposed to do with this? Before he finished his thought, the spell spoke again. Its voice sounded a bit strange. It was almost excited. You have acquired a drop of ichor. Do you wish to consume it? Sunny blinked. Consume a memory? Things were getting weirder and weirder. He hesitated. What was going to happen if he did consume it? Memories were rewards given by the spell to the awakened. As such, they were usually useful, very rarely useless, and never harmful. At least that was the common knowledge. However, this one was out of the ordinary, and it was the spell he was talking about. The damn thing was nothing if not unpredictable, usually with catastrophic consequences. The safest approach would be to put the golden liquid back into his soul sea and never touch it again. But it was a memory received from a great devil. Chances were he would never hold another one in his whole life, not even in his dreams. Sunny was simply unwilling to let this opportunity go. Trying to calm his rapidly beating heart, he licked his lips and said,
"Yes, I want to consume it."
"As you wish," the spell replied. The golden sphere separated into two streams of beautiful, radiant liquid. The streams flowed through the air, approaching Sunny's face. He felt a gentle touch caress his cheeks. Then the golden liquid reached his eyes and flowed through them, entering his soul through the pupils. Soon it was gone. Sunny was frozen, not knowing what to expect. A second passed, then another. He raised his trembling hands to his face, finally feeling something. In the next moment, Sunny opened his mouth and let out a terrible, wailing shriek as unimaginable, blinding pain tore through his entire being. Sunny fell into the soft embrace of spiderwebs, screaming, his whole body convulsing in spasms of terrible pain. The unbearable agony radiated through his nervous system, his mind drowning in the endless torrent of torturous, excruciating, harrowing suffering. It felt as though every muscle, every fiber, every molecule of his body was being torn apart and reassembled, only to be torn apart again. His eyes, especially, felt as though there were two white-hot metal rods inserted in them, making all the other pain pale in comparison. Or maybe they had become searing spheres of molten metal themselves. He clawed at his face, leaving bloody marks on it. However, seconds later they were already gone, erased by some unknown force. His voice was soon gone too, leaving Sunny without an outlet to express his horrible torment. The process was the opposite of the gentle rebirth he had experienced after passing the first nightmare. It was violent, ruthless, and unnatural, forcefully reshaping Sunny's body into something that it was not meant to be, that nothing was ever meant to be. Powerless to stop it, Sunny had no choice but to endure the agony. All he could do was try not to go mad from pain. Tears were streaming down his face, leaving bloody trails in their wake. There was no end to torture. Then, after what felt like an eternity, there was. The pain subsided, lessened, and finally vanished. Sunny was left lying on the thick carpet of spiderwebs, utterly drained and depleted. In the silence that was broken only by the hoarse sound of his ragged breathing, the spell's voice whispered, "You have acquired a new attribute. One of your attributes is ready to evolve." Sunny remained motionless for a long time, slowly coming back to his senses. The memory of the terrible ordeal was still echoing in his mind, making him shudder from time to time. He was afraid to open his eyes and look at his body, afraid to see himself changed in some horrific, repulsive way. Have I become a monster? Feeling a sense of dread, Sunny shut his eyes tighter. However, he did not feel like a monster. In fact, he didn't feel different at all. From what he could tell, he still had 2 hands, 2 legs, and soft human skin. There was no change in his strength and resilience. It was as though nothing had happened. Come on, just do it. With a nervous sigh, Sunny opened his eyes and looked himself over. Everything was the same. He shifted his perception and studied himself again through the shadow. He was still human. Well, something did change, but he couldn't quite describe it. It was as though his vision was slightly different from before. The world seemed deeper, somehow. Sunny only noticed the difference because of the contrast between his own perception and that of the shadow. Previously, they were more or less similar. A drop of ichor that came from the weaver's eye. Carefully, he raised a hand and touched his eyes. They felt the same, but they were also different. He just couldn't understand in what way. Lowering his hand, Sunny noticed a drop of blood on one of his fingers. It came from a small scratch on his cheek, one that had not healed like the others. Deep inside his blood, Sunny noticed a barely visible hint of the golden shine, as if the radiant drop of golden liquid he had absorbed was still there, now a part of him, strongly diluted and fused into his own bloodstream. The shine was so faint that he had almost missed it. Sunny suspected that in the light, it wouldn't be visible at all. What the hell have I done to myself? That was the moment when he accidentally glanced at the Poupetter's shroud, simultaneously thinking about the golden shine. Something switched in Sunny's head, and suddenly he saw the memory differently. His eyes widened. Under the surface of the gray fabric, 5 glowing embers were shining with ethereal light. Each of them represented a nexus and anchor of countless diamond strings that stretched to different parts of the armor, weaving an intricate, elaborate, unpredictable pattern. It looked a lot like the inner void of the spell, only at an infinitely smaller scale. However, Sonny was surprised to find out that he sort of understood the pattern. A newly found innate knowledge helped him sense the traces of logic behind the seemingly chaotic placement of the strings, a defined purpose behind every twist and turn. They were meant to achieve certain effects, durability, resilience, and another, more complex type of protection. The hint of understanding came naturally to him, as though it was his innate ability. I need to study this further. Intrigued and apprehensive, he entered the Soul Sea. A familiar dark expanse of still water appeared in front of his mind's eye. There was the looming shadow core, the shining satellites of his memories, and the strange feeling that something was moving just beyond the periphery of his vision. Out of habit, Sonny turned his head to try and catch sight of that something, knowing that he would not see anything. However, this time he did. With a startled yelp, Sonny flinched away and lost his balance. What the hell? What the actual hell? Out there in the darkness, at the border of the dim light cast by the shining memories, stood motionless black figures. They were shadows of creatures he had killed. There was a shadow that resembled the slave with broad shoulders and bloodied back, one whose name Sonny had never bothered to learn. His figure was deformed and horrifying, as he had been transformed into a murderous beast after becoming the host of a Mountain King's larva. That larva was then strangled by Sonny. The shadow of the Mountain King itself was towering above him, just as dreadful and abhorrent as the tyrant had been when still alive. Sonny shuddered as he remembered escaping from the horrid creature's claws. The shadow of the cruel slaver that had hit him with the whip was also there, standing beside the tyrant. This was the first, and for now the only, human whose life Sonny had ended with his own 2 hands. He even stole the boots and cloak of the dead man's body. On both sides of them there were other shadows. Hulking carapace scavengers stood silently, their pincers lowered to the ground. A fearsome centurion's savage silhouette could be seen among them, surrounded by the giant centipedes, bulbous knots of carnivorous worms, and a few strange, mane-eating flowers. Every single being that had fallen by Sonny's hand was there in the form of a shadow. Or, to be more precise, every being whose shadow's fragments had been absorbed by him. Despite the fact that shadows had no eyes, he couldn't help but feel that they were all staring at him, silent, motionless, watching. Feeling cold shivers running down his spine, Sonny gulped and stood up, his legs shaking a little. Finding out that a small army of dead shadows had appeared inside your soul sea was not the most pleasant of surprises, let alone if those shadows once belonged to creatures who you had personally slain. He clenched his teeth. Can I repeat, what the actual hell? The shadows stared at Sonny, and Sonny stared at the shadows. After a while, the situation became a bit awkward. Sonny shifted a little, then hesitantly asked,
Are you guys not going to do anything?
The shadows did not react, remaining as motionless and quiet as they had been from the start. As a matter of fact, he didn't see them move or show any sign of life at all. In that regard, they were even more lifeless than his echo had been here in the Sea of Soul. Sonny scratched his head. His initial fear was slowly disappearing. At first he was scared out of his wits, but more so from being startled than from feeling an actual threat. This was his soul sea, after all. Very few things could harm him here. Sonny was pretty sure that the shadows were not capable of doing anything, let alone attacking him. They seemed more like manifestations of some weird facet of his aspect, rather than actual beings. As such, they weren't dangerous. The question was, why did the shadows suddenly appear? After briefly thinking about it, Sonny came to the conclusion that they did not actually appear, per se. Instead, they were always here. It's just that he had not been able to see them. But now, with his eyes changed by the strange transformation he had gone through, he could, just like he could see the diamond strings inside the puppeteer's shroud. Speaking of the puppeteer's shroud, glancing at the silent shadows one last time to make sure that they would not lunge at him, Sonny frowned with suspicion and turned away. His back instantly began to tingle. Just think of them as fashionable pieces of furniture. Who says soul seas don't need a touch of interior design? Somewhat consoled, he walked closer to the shining spheres that represented memories, and summoned the puppeteer's shroud. One of the spheres floated down and slowly dimmed, revealing the armor within. Just like before, Sonny could see 5 glowing nexuses and countless strings permeating the gray fabric. They resembled miniature stars assembled into a constellation. The shroud came from a tyrant, which is a class of nightmare creatures with 5 soul cores. 5 soul cores, 5th-tier memory, 5 nexuses makes sense. For some reason, the number 5 moved something in his mind. Sonny scowled, not understanding the feeling of unease that suddenly appeared out of nowhere and disrupted the flow of his thoughts. Trying to concentrate on the task at hand, he summoned the runes describing the puppeteer's shroud. The familiar description appeared in the air around the armor. The memory was Puppeteer's shroud. Its rank was awakened. Its tier was 5. Its type was armor. And its description read, a worm of doubt. The identification of the tier was new. It seems that the spell decided to be helpful and incorporated Sunny's new understanding of the inner workings of memories into its interface. Tiers were not something that humans had learned from the spell. Instead, it was just an improvised way of differentiating memories of different power levels within the same rank. It was often unreliable and outright wrong, but it was better than nothing. But in the case of Sunny, the information was 100% true. He could confirm it with his own 2 eyes just by counting the number of core remnants inside a memory. He could even understand their purpose. That might be extremely useful. However, his attention was drawn to something else. At the very bottom of the description, a new cluster of runes appeared. The memory had 2 enchantments, enhanced durability and doubtless. Sunny smiled. That was what he was hoping for. Previously, he had only been able to intuitively sense the special qualities of his memories, with no way to learn their true nature and limits except for the trial and error approach, and using that method during a battle was not conducive to survival. Now, however, he concentrated on one of the enchantments. The enchantment called Doubtless had a description that read, provides the wearer with a small amount of protection against mind attacks. Good to know. The amount was small because it was just an awakened memory. Since enhanced durability was self-explanatory, Sunny dismissed the puppeteer's shroud and summoned the silver bell. The small bell had only 1 spark of light, which was much less bright than the ones inside the puppeteer's shroud, at that. Studying the runes did not show anything interesting. It was a Tier 1 dormant memory with a single enchantment that increased the range at which its ringing could be heard to several kilometers. Finally, it was time to take a look at the Midnight Shard. The graceful blade appeared in front of Sunny in all its austere beauty. The memory was Midnight Shard. Its rank was awakened. Its tier was 3. Its description read, forged from the shard of a fallen star. This stalwart blade is firm and unyielding. It favors those who are willing to fight to the last drop of blood and knows no surrender. The blade had 1 memory enchantment called Unbroken. Its description read, this blade refuses to be broken, and thus is durable beyond reason. It will greatly enhance the power of its wielder when they are close to death, however only if the wielder is unwilling to surrender. Sunny sighed, simultaneously satisfied and disappointed. Now he knew how to access the well of power that hid in the deepest parts of his heart when the Midnight Shard was in his hand. However, it could only be done when he was at the death's door, wounded and minutes away from perishing. It could either save him from a dire situation or create an opportunity for a very heroic last stand. Sunny did not care for heroics, so the second option did not seem appealing at all. The first one was much more useful, but only in the case of him screwing up terribly and getting himself in a lethal amount of trouble. In other words, it could only be used if he failed. In normal battles, the special qualities of the Midnight Shard were of no use at all. A pity, but an ace in your sleeve in case things really go south is not bad either. Done with his memories, Sunny was ready to learn of the new attribute he had received. Considering how much pain he had to go through to acquire the damn thing, he had pretty high expectations. Looking for the cluster of runes representing his attributes, Sunny focused his attention and carefully read their names. There were 5 attributes: Fated, Mark of Divinity, Child of Shadows, and the new one, Bloodweave. Sunny was about to summon the description of Bloodweave, but then stopped. Something was not right. Something did not add up. The feeling of unease from before had returned, now much stronger. When did he first feel it? For some reason, his thoughts were slow and murky. He felt a strong inclination to forget all about the strange feeling and concentrate on something else. But this time, he did not. It was when I was studying the puppeteer's shroud, and it was connected to the number 5. 5. What meaning was there to the number 5? With his attention beginning to wane, Sunny bit his lip, causing drops of blood to roll down. A burst of pain cleared his mind for a moment. There were 5 attributes: Fated, Mark of Divinity, Child of Shadows, and Bloodweave. What? There were 5 attributes, but he only counted 4. Bewildered, Sunny stared at the runes. He was sure that there was a 5th attribute, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't read its name and description. Every time his gaze fell on the runes corresponding to the 5th attribute, he would find himself distracted, his memory wiped clean of any mention of it. Just remembering that there were 5 attributes was incredibly hard. Clenching his teeth, Sunny tried to keep his concentration, not allowing himself to be distracted. He was not going to forget.
5, it's 5. There's 5 of them, damn it.
Immediately after he said those words out loud, something changed. It was as though an invisible veil had fallen from his eyes, or rather, from his mind. Sonny froze, shock and fear permeating his heart. He was remembering. Didn't I see a dream? Yes, of course, he saw Cassie standing over him with panic in her eyes, begging him to remember the number 5. No, wait! Was that a dream? At the time, he believed so, but then he forgot. Just as he had forgotten what actually happened on that day. On the day when Cassie woke him up to tell him something important. It happened on the day they killed the carapace demon. Back then, all 3 of them were utterly exhausted. After moving away from the corpse of the giant creature and finding a good hiding spot, they fell to the ground and immediately fell asleep. But they didn't stay asleep for long. An hour or 2 later, Sonny was shaken awake by Cassie, who was holding him by the shoulders. There was an expression of terror written clearly on her face.
Sonny, wake up!
Instantly coming back to his senses, he jumped to his feet and summoned the Midnight Shard, afraid that they were under attack. However, there was no one around except for panicked Cassie and wary Nephis, who was in a similar pose, her sword raised and ready to strike. Confused, Sonny looked at the blind girl.
Cassie, what's the matter?
Grabbing him by the shoulders again, she brought her face close and whispered in a begging tone,
Sonny, you have to stop it. Please, you are the only one who can.
He frowned, failing to understand what exactly he was supposed to stop. Did she see another vision? Trying to calm her, he said in a measured tone.
It's all right, Cassie. Slow down, breathe. Tell us what happened. Start from the beginning.
She desperately shook her head.
There's no time. I will forget soon. We all will. But you have to remember.
We will all forget soon? What does she mean? Not able to see Sonny's dazed expression, Cassie yelled.
You have to remember, Sonny. 5, it's 5. Remember. You have to remember. It's 5.
Remember 5? The blind girl was not making any sense. Sonny carefully put his arm around her, feeling how scared she was from her shaking body.
All right, Cass. I promise I'll remember. 5, right? See, it's pretty hard to forget.
Nephis was looking at them with a frown, not neglecting to scan the surroundings for any signs of danger from time to time. For some reason, Cassie was only talking to Sonny, not paying her any attention. What was it that she thought Sonny could do, but Changing Star could not? Hearing his answer, the blind girl calmed down a little. However, she was still terrified.
Good, remember, it's 5. You promised.
Her voice sounded quieter and quieter, as though she was not sure of what she was saying. Sonny was barely able to discern her mumbling.
The more complex a thought, the harder it will be to hold on to it. That's why I can only tell you this one word, the simplest thing to impart. When the right time comes, it might change things.
Carefully choosing his words, Sonny hesitantly asked,
Cassie, can you tell us what happened exactly?
Hearing his voice, the blind girl flinched and raised her head to face him. There were still traces of fear in her eyes, but mostly it had been replaced by confusion.
Huh? Did something happen?
Sonny blinked. Wasn't she the one who woke them up in a panic? Wait, why did she wake us up to begin with? For some reason, he had trouble remembering the details of the past few minutes. The conversation they just had was already hazy in his memory. I guess I'm still groggy from waking up so abruptly. Lack of sleep affects concentration.
You wanted to tell us something. It had to do with the, number 5?
Cassie raised her eyebrows.
5? Why 5?
Sonny didn't know what to say. He was going to ask the same question.
I have no clue.
Perplexed, he looked at Nephis, hoping that she will be able to clear the situation. Changing Star was standing a few steps away with a distracted expression on her face. Sensing his gaze, she stared at him and asked,
Why do you have your sword out?
Sonny glanced at the Midnight Shard and tried to remember what had caused him to summon the memory.
I'm not sure. Why did you summon yours?
Nephis looked down, as though noticing the sword in her hands for the first time. An expression of doubt appeared on her face. What's wrong with our heads today? Understanding that it was pointless to expect help from Nephis, Sonny sighed and turned back to Cassie.
Did you see another vision?
The blind girl trembled, her eyes opened wide, once again filled with fear.
A vision, yes, I saw a vision. An awful, awful vision.
What did you see?
She was silent for a few moments, trying to remember. A deep frown appeared on her face. Finally, Cassie quietly said,
I saw a mountain of corpses. Countless bodies piled on each other until they formed a blood-soaked hill, and at the top of it, a tiny black seed was floating in a pool of blood.
She grew silent, then continued.
That was the past, I think, but then I saw the future, a future, it was us. Oh gods, we were.
Her voice trembled. As though not daring to say something aloud, Cassie stopped. Sonny waited for a while, then carefully asked,
We were what?
The blind girl turned to him in confusion.
What?
He scratched the back of his head. What were they just talking about?
You were, telling us about your vision, I think?
Cassie frowned.
What vision?
To his embarrassment, Sonny wasn't sure either. He just remembered something about the number 5 and a seed. For some reason, he felt as though that number was very important. But why? He had no idea.
I forgot.
Suddenly, Nephis, who was standing nearby, lowered her hands and dismissed the sword that she had been holding for some reason. Looking at them with a bit of confusion, she hesitantly asked,
"Why are you guys awake? We need to rest. Something might get attracted by the demon's corpse, so we'd better return to peak condition as soon as possible."
Distracted and already forgetting about the conversation with Cassie, Sonny blinked a couple of times, shrugged, and decided to go back to sleep. None of this made sense anyway. They were probably struck dumb by exhaustion. He felt so tired. A few hours later, when the shadow noticed the winged creature circling around the island, he awoke again. By that time, the memory of Cassie's warning was so fragmented and hazy that it seemed like a strange dream. But the seed was already planted deep into his subconscious. And now that it had blossomed, Sonny was finally able to fight through the haze of oblivion and remember everything. Sitting inside the vile thieving bird's nest, Sonny frowned and clenched his fists. Something unnatural was happening to them ever since they came to the Ashen Barrow. Now that he had remembered Cassie's warning, it was apparent that their minds were affected, making them forgetful and easily distracted. Even now that he knew about it, thinking straight was strangely hard. It took all of his will just to keep the knowledge of the anomaly in his memory. The events of these past few days were still hazy. Remembering something else, Sonny closed his eyes in frustration. Had they really spent mere days on this island? The number of shadow fragments he received from eating soul tree fruits suggested otherwise. It was quite possible that as much as a whole month had passed since the first time they ate them, and their minds were corroded a bit more with every day that passed. Pretty soon there would be nothing left of them at all, only empty shells, walking around wearing their faces. Sonny's face paled. With a growing feeling of dread, he realized that there were large gaps in his memory. He could not remember how they got to the Ashen Barrow, and where they were going. Other things, too, were unclear and blurry. Stay calm. Despite how compromised his memory was, there were still ways to understand what was going on, and then maybe undo it. After all, he was able to remember Cassie's warning. That meant that their memories were not gone, just obfuscated. First step, resist the impulse to forget everything again. Not succumbing to the constant pull on his mind was not an easy task, but he was able to manage, at least for now. Second step, try to understand the reason why you were able to remember these things. When Cassie begged him to remember the number 5, she must have already known that he would receive a new attribute. He had noticed the existence of the mysterious 5th attribute as the result, which triggered the frightening revelation. However, why was he able to not forget about the existence of the 5th attribute altogether? What made him so special? Cassie had even said that he was the only one who could do it. Why him and not Changing Star? Sonny massaged his temples. Then a sudden realization came to him. Doubtless, one of the enchantments of the puppeteer's shroud was providing him with a small amount of resistance against mind attacks. That's why he was slightly less susceptible to the frightening forgetfulness that infected them on the Ashen Barrow. That was the reason why he had been the last one to agree to eat the miraculous fruits. Why he had often felt that things were wrong. He was also the only one who had managed to remember Cassie's warning, even if it took him a long time. Cassie knew about the puppeteer's shroud, and that's why she had chosen him instead of Nephis. Smart girl. So their warped state was the result of a mind attack. But who could attack them on this desolate island? The answer was pretty obvious. That damn tree. Looking down, Sonny felt cold sweat running down his back. The soul tree was in fact a colossal, ancient, and utterly horrifying nightmare creature. If he was right, then its power had to be simply unimaginable. He was afraid to even think about what its rank and class were. No wonder it was able to drain a whole area of the crimson labyrinth of all life. No wonder it was able to survive and thrive in this hellish place. Of all the horrors in this hell, it might have been the most terrifying. Finally, Sonny knew the reason why no other nightmare creature dared to approach the Ashen Barrow. Even monsters were afraid of the soul tree, except for equally harrowing things that dwelled beneath the waves of the deep dark sea. There was no way for them to destroy it. The soul tree was just too big, old, and powerful. For a moment, Sonny entertained the idea of setting it on fire, but quickly abandoned it. He would need a volcanic eruption, or some sort of divine intervention to burn that colossus down. So what to do? After thinking for some time, Sonny decided not to be hasty and move forward one step at a time. First, he had to know the exact situation with his attributes. Summoning the runes, he tried once again to read the description of the hidden 5th attribute. The result was the same. He knew it was there, but could not remember what it was, no matter how much he tried. Figures. Confirming that it was still impossible for him to solve that mystery on his own, Sonny moved his attention to the Mark of Divinity. New runes appeared under its description. The Mark of Divinity was described as bearing a faint scent of divinity. as though someone briefly touched by it once, a long time ago. A chime sounded. The mark of divinity was ready to evolve. Not wasting time, Sunny agreed. Immediately, the name and the description of the attribute changed. The new attribute was the spark of divinity. The description read, "Every fire starts from a spark. Somewhere deep within his soul, a radiant spark shines with divine light." He didn't feel any changes within himself. It seemed as though the question of whether or not he wanted to proceed was just a formality, and the attribute already evolved back when he had consumed the drop of ichor. "My affiliation to divinity has increased. Neat, although I'm not sure how it might be useful." Was that spark of divinity the reason why he was now able to see the inner workings of memories, as well as some other stuff like the shadows in his soul sea? If so, was it a universal trait of all awakened with high divine affiliation, or just his? For some reason, Sunny felt that it was the latter option. He had received the drop of ichor from a being called Weaver, and then became able to see the strings that were weaved through the memories, giving them their unique qualities. It wasn't hard to see the connection. If this was true, did it mean that there were different kinds of divinity, and he inherited a small amount of a very special kind of divinity? Was Weaver even a deity? Every god he had heard about was named in a similar fashion. There was Shadow God, War God, well that's it, he had never heard the names of any other god. However, Weaver's name was different. Maybe Weaver was not a deity at all. Maybe he, she, or it was actually one of the unknown. Sunny shook his head, feeling that he had almost allowed himself to get distracted and release the hold on his memory. He could not allow himself to go on tangents now. Concentrating, he examined his new attribute, Blood Weave. The description showed he had inherited a part of Weaver's forbidden lineage, and his blood had been altered and imbued with odd tenacity, so he would be less likely to bleed out in the future. That was a very nice enhancement. However, it did not help Sunny with his current situation. It was time for the next step. It was early morning when Sunny descended from the soul tree. However, he didn't bring any fruit with him. Walking over to sleeping Cassie, he took her by the shoulders and gently shook her awake. The irony of how this situation mirrored the one where Cassie had told Sunny to remember the number 5 was not lost on him. The blind girl slowly came to her senses and turned to face him with a sleepy, confused expression.
Sunny, why are you up so early?
He hesitated, then said with a friendly smile, trying very hard to act as though everything was all right.
Actually, I didn't sleep at all this night.
Cassie frowned. Luckily, she could not see the sorry state he was in, nor the dried blood on his face.
Really? Why?
He shrugged.
I decided to climb the soul tree and search for some fruits. But that's not very important. Hey, your aspect ability allows you to see other people's attributes, right?
She nodded, still confused.
Yes, you know this, why?
Sunny lingered, then said in a carefree tone,
Can you take a look at mine?